Hours ago, I spoke with the South African policy analyst Sandile Swana. I started our conversation by exploring what policy areas could get agreement at the Heads of State Summit without the presence of the Americans.
One of the major issues that is on the table right now, which will be prominent, is some form of policy on trade, international trade, because as you know, this year has seen unprecedented disruptions in trade. So that will be there. Related to that will be issues how to re-establish multilateralism as a practice, which also has been under attack. So those two really are at the center of the priorities, because everything else that is concrete then comes from those two.
Should we expect any progress with respect to debt, for example? Because the G20 Common Framework has come under fire, it's, for being too slow, too clumsy in delivering relief to countries in debt distress. Zambia, for example, they applied for debt restructuring as far back as February 2021, a few months after they defaulted. They only got a deal with bilateral lenders in April 2024. It's a massive amount of time there. What sort of changes are the panel of experts proposing to make debt reforms way faster, way more effective?
One of the central issues in the delaying in this debt restructuring is the multiplicity of creditors who are not in agreement, the different types of creditors, and so to actually get them to agree is a problem. So one of the ways that you solve that is that you need to have a plan. You have to have some unified entry point into lending to the nation, so that when it's time to restructure, to negotiate, there is one architecture for that nation and one perhaps coordinator of that debt. Those are some of the issues that have to be ironed out. But obviously there is legacy issues that are in place. But going forward, those would be some of the solutions.
The Americans are taking over the leadership, the rotating presidency of the G20 next year in 2026. And a lot of the things that South Africa has as its policy priorities, right? You spoke about multilateralism. The Americans are disdainful of cooperation through multilateral forums, the WTO, the United Nations. There are questions around whether or not they're actually going to keep funding them and so on and so forth. Debt isn't a priority for them. Climate change, which has been a priority for South Africa. The American government seems to think that's some sort of big hoax. Are there any parts of the policy ideas that South Africa has worked on this year that could transition into 2026?
One of the more clearer ones, obviously there's a lot of detailed work that would need to be done, is that there's the harnessing of critical minerals. As you are aware, even the US is suffering from the issue of how the minerals are changing hands amongst the nations of the world. And that is one of the areas that South Africa has been focusing on. So that should remain. The question will be the details and the philosophy under which it remains. I expect that to happen. However, having said that, I have looked again at the other three priorities. For instance, mobilizing finance for just energy transition. The European Union is very committed to that. And China is committed to that. Let's say BRICS is committed to that. So the USA is going to have a very tough time in trying to run a solo show, contrary to the overall overwhelming majority of the G20.
With respect to the question around, the use of critical minerals, do you think we might end up in a situation where we finally stop the situation where, to quote a lot of policymakers over the years, we're just exporting raw minerals out of our economies, out of countries, say in Africa, and not doing any value addition at all, essentially at rock bottom prices? Might 2026 be the year that starts to change, because we're going to see, because at least there's an element of leverage that African economies have?
Yes, I think it's not going to be overnight. For now, the issue is to change the thinking of the players, the Americans, the Europeans, and everybody. And I think we're going to succeed in that. And then, obviously, the underlying human rights issues have got to be underlying human rights issues and environmental issues. There is evidence that we cannot continue on any part of the earth the way that things have been going on around minerals and mining.